on a roll.
I had a lot of coffee today.
The recording's in progress.
Let's do this. I am ready for these chapters because they also made me want to like jump through a wall, like Kool-Aid Man style, like burst through the wall, like running over everything.
That was definitely a flashback. The cool. These are heavy chapters for sure. I think the first one is heavier for sure, but yeah, I'm really excited to talk about them.
Yeah. It's just a lot to unload there. So this week we're talking about hashtag fast-tailed girls, and it's reigning the patriarchy. So two crazy topics that honestly I had never heard of the term fast-tailed girl before.
Oh, interesting. It was one I'm very familiar with. It's certainly one that has been used in my upbringing I'm sure you've learned from reading that chapter, talk about younger girls who seem to be a little more advanced when it comes to relationships with partners.
Like I've heard of, I got the concept pretty quickly, but I'd never heard the term fast-tailed girl. I think the terms that I heard growing up were there's not a father figure in the house, and they just straight up called her a slut. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. And it all, there are different names, but they all mean the same thing.
They really do. They really do. Like at first, whenever I read what Kendall was talking about with fast-tailed girls, I was just like, okay, is she gonna talk about like where the term came from, all that stuff? Nope. We just got into it.
Yeah, that's true. I guess maybe the assumption was that people knew, or maybe the assumption was that even if they didn't know fast-tailed girls, that they knew some understanding of who she was talking about.
Yeah. Context clues. Context clues and critical thinking skills. We are humans that have a frontal lobe to do that. Yeah.
Was there a specific point that stood out to you?
It like this chapter really challenged my biases for sure. Like whenever Kendall definitely talks about the hypersexualization of women and girls of color, and like the, what was it? She called it the Madonna darn it, what was it? It was
I could peek. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was the Madonna, I don't want to say slut, but like it was that kind of a duality.
Oh, I got it. Madonna whore complexes.
Okay, I was like, slut, whore, yeah. It's all there.
Yeah. Sheesh.
Oh, because the complexes and that duality did exist in my world growing up. But no one ever really questioned it. I did not grow up in a very diverse community. So it was definitely looked at as a very much other thing. I kind of grew up on the side of all the white girls around me are the Madonna virginal like image and stuff like that, and girls of color, women of color were seen as simply just other, which complicated a lot for me growing up in a white community and not being white, but having internalized whiteness like that definitely confused me a lot. And then whenever I heard about like the Asian China doll geisha complex, like that just threw threw me completely, like tilted my world on an axis.
Yeah. I think your point of bringing up like the white Madonna complex and not being a white woman, I think the difference that Mikki does a really good job of pointing out is that white girls and white women, there's a societal understanding that they deserve to be protected, and that is not reciprocated for women and girls of color, which is really unfortunate because we're all humans, and if we're doing the same things, we all deserve to be protected doing the same things.
Exactly. Like it enrages me, like I said, opening this, it makes me like want to punch through a wall like Kool-Aid cartoon character, because it really what it conveys is value, is human value again, and whether or not like white people are inherently, quote unquote, more valuable than people of color, which is complete and utter bleep.
Right. Yeah, I know what you wanted to say there. You did a good job. Yeah, it's not true. And I think, to add on capitalism, one of the inherent racist, sexist things about capitalism is that society has determined that white people are more productive, are more valuable. And then that plays a role in salary, that plays a role in quality of life.
Like, and it doesn't even go into like whenever we're talking about growing up in a woman's body, in a body that is a person of color, like growing up in that and having to navigate all of this as like a 12 and a 13-year-old, even going as young as 10, like that was a hard thing for me to read, especially like in social work world, having worked with women and like women of color who have experienced sexual violence at very young ages. Whenever I read that line that some people in society like they don't victim blame necessarily, but they're not as up in arms about it as they would be for a white woman, and that makes me angry.
For sure. That is all throughout this chapter. It is very concerning. And I think, like you said, victim blaming, it plays perfectly. We see this all throughout. And I like how Mikki takes a more aggressive approach, just in terms of, we need to talk about, it's nobody's fault if something happens to them except for the perpetrator. And so just taking it, okay, we don't need to focus on women. We don't need to focus on these vulnerable populations who need to maybe don't wear this or don't drink this or don't do this. No, the focus needs to be on the people who are actively pursuing the violence.
Like whenever it comes to human on human violence, and then whenever Kendall describes like even in college and university age, how bystanders don't even stand up for other women whenever violence is being perpetrated in fear of their own safety. That is also just very angering. And so like I don't even know where to put it, because Kendall specifically tells us, don't just automatically snap over there and say, hey, it's all the patriarchy, F the patriarchy, because that's like my gut reaction. That's what I want to do. I just want to go and take an axe to the patriarchy.
Which would certainly help. But yeah, she makes it very clear that's not the solution.
And like, whenever it comes to something like this, because like physical and sexual violence are two things that are so hard to not only like obviously to go through, but to talk about and to try to even solve these problems. Like, talking about it is hard. Just simply talking about it. And we're sitting here reading about this happening to women and girls as young as preteens. And it makes me want to throw something.
Yeah, Mikki definitely talks about how there's more of an emphasis, and I could definitely look at the quote because I definitely don't want to butcher it, but there's more of an emphasis on saving people's or perpetrators' histories, and not trying to completely demolish who they are and all that they've accomplished. And there's not enough focus on protecting women and protecting survivors.
Absolutely. Like, I know Kendall brought up the whole R. Kelly case. Kendall also brought up the concept of the adultification of women of color as well, as a way to justify violence acted towards them. And it's a mess. All of it.
I agree. And she definitely talks about, let me see if I wrote it down. No, I didn't. But she definitely talks about, on that note, how there's specifically, I think she was talking about Black culture. You want to protect men who are victims of racism, but not at the expense of Black women, which is what we see with R. Kelly. And there's so many names that I could say that I'm not going to because it's so hurtful. But there's, again, not that protection of Black and brown women.
Oh my gosh. It's just, where was it that Kendall was also just like, oh yeah, it was whenever they were she was talking about, yes, intersectional feminism, in that there is a I'm not going to be able to talk today. Whenever she was talking about Lena Dunham and how, I don't want to butcher this, I'm gonna look it up, but Lena Dunham,
yes,
defended one of her friends who was a perpetuator of violence, at the expense of the survivor, which was a woman of color. So it's a white woman protecting whiteness before protecting femininity.
And that certainly sums up why Me Too, or not Me Too, excuse me, why the feminist movement is not inclusive.
Because, like, historically speaking, like, women of color have been completely just left out of the conversation. I also went through a DEI training today for work. So I think I might be mixing some things up in my brain. Because my DEI training also did discuss intersectionality, which I was very impressed with, honestly.
Yes. Yay, that's fantastic.
One of the educators was like, well, do I say that I am a Black woman, or do I say that I am a woman who is Black? Like, which one do I put forward, and which one has this company like put on my shoulders to represent? Because I cannot represent all women and I cannot represent all Black people. So, like, what am I supposed to do with that? And I was just like, oh my goodness, that is brilliant.
Yeah, I've never even thought about it that way. A woman who is Black. I remember we were doing this exercise at some conference I was at, and they told us to write down identities we hold. And I wrote, like, the first thing I wrote was Black. And then I was working with some white women, and she was like, it's just so interesting that, like, that was one of your first things. And I didn't write white anywhere on mine. It just speaks to culturally how Black people and brown people have been always reminded of their race, as opposed to white people where it's just a very different experience. It doesn't play a big role it plays a big role in your experience, but it's not one that's completely constantly emphasized.
What makes me what also blows my mind is whenever you say American, especially in American society, the default is white. Like my identifier is Chinese American or Asian American. It's not just straight American. Because white is the default, unfortunately, for the US. And like I remember one time I was on a trip with my church. I'm gonna do this again. I was on a trip with my church, and we were in Africa, and someone was like, no, they're African Americans, and everyone in the van just looked at them and they were like, no, they're not even American. Like, we're not in America, don't call them African American.
Oh goodness. Oh goodness.
It's like the way that it is ingrained and internalized in us from such a young age, just the colloquialisms and the simple language, like that is scary in and of itself. But whenever we talk about the hashtag fast-tailed girls, thinking about how much of that is ingrained and internalized into our society. Like, I didn't know a term for it, but I knew what it was.
Yes. And I think Mikki talks, I really appreciate the emphasis on, I was thinking something and now it's just like gone away.
We record this at 5 p.m. after a work day, and like both of us are always like, yeah, we have good thoughts. We have thoughts.
It'll come back to me at the most random time, but I really do appreciate. Oh, I know what it is. See, she talks about how we internalize it and we perpetuate it as women. And I thought that was really, really important because, again, I think our last time we talked about how hate crimes and hate speech is not innocent, like there are consequences for that. And so this like internalization and this perpetuation of sexism is very dangerous if you're doing it at all, it's dangerous for you and it's dangerous for other women, specifically women of color.
It's so scary because we're like, oh, we're not just being outwardly racist, you're being racist in your head and you're not even aware of it. It's like one of those, like, we're all walking around like racist zombies without brains. There's a cure, but like at the same time, we're just like, oh, our default and our knee-jerk reaction right now, based on generational trauma, based on historic like abuse of people of color and just flat out survival instincts, have made it to where racism is our default, and it sucks.
Yeah, and it just speaks to the importance of understanding what you think, your biases, and working towards that, because we all have them. I definitely could have used this chapter a couple years ago. I grew up in a very conservative Christian background, and like I said, I knew fast-tailed girls. Like, I knew that term, I knew what that was about. And I certainly haven't always been the biggest advocate because I believe some of these myths that culture has taught us. But in order for me to understand, I had to learn things. I had to read perspectives. I had to grow up. I had to experience life. And so now, fortunately, there's been so much growth. Thank goodness. But I mean, even me, well-intending, I still have to put in my work because otherwise I could still do harm. It's possible I still do harm, but I try my best to minimize it.
Exactly. And I think that's the best that we can all do, is to try to not be racist zombies. Like, I love the fact that these two chapters have been put together because, once again, my other knee-jerk reaction is to automatically blame the patriarchy, which is a huge way to just blame some overarching entity. Like, I don't know about you, but like growing up in my Christian background, we would just be like, oh, it's the devil's fault.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's like the patriarchy is the devil, and you're just like, oh, it's the patriarchy. It's always the patriarchy. The patriarchy is sneaky, the great deceiver. Anyways.
You're on a roll.
I had a lot of coffee today. But like, okay, if you grew up Christian and you're listening to this, you would know what I mean whenever I say the devil is the great deceiver, the patriarchy.
Yes.
But like, it's because it's out of self-preservation under the oppression of the patriarchy, and even worse, under the oppression of the white patriarchy, that we throw each other under the bus.
Yeah, Mikki talks about, I hope I wrote it down, choose me. I don't know if you saw that, but that, wow, that really hit me. She talks about like the choose me culture, and because of this idea that there's not enough for all of us, and so some women, she was talking specifically about women, will do things that will make them more attractive in men's eyes, so in that way they can get married and do all of the things, and they can find a partner. And I was just like, wow. I didn't really think about it like that, but there are certainly things that people do in order to make sure that they have a partner.
Like, humanity, we will throw each other under the bus. Like, I feel like it's just another element of human nature, which also just flat out sucks. Everything sucks. It's fine. But it's
yeah, survival is certainly, I think you bring up a good point. Survival is certainly a factor in this. And so if you think this is the way to survive, and this is what I need to do to survive, to obtain that, then you do it. And if someone's in the way, or you perceive them as in the way, then absolutely you will go through them, you will throw them under the bus, you will do anything to get rid of that obstacle, because we're survivors.
I'm going to use the zombie analogy again, because I'm kind of on a roll. So we are willing to trip other people when a zombie is coming after us, but if we're too busy tripping other people, we might trip ourselves, when we could just team up and get rid of the zombie.
Yeah, and I mean, you definitely see. Please don't ever stop with the zombie. You can definitely see, I mean, in some areas, like one of the earliest lessons you learn in school is teamwork and working in groups and working with your classmates. But there certainly are areas in which things are more individualized. And I think that's intentionally done, because we're not meant to do any of this by ourselves. But the way society and culture has been set up, it's kind of made us think, okay, we could work together for this, but like, this is mine. And there's nothing wrong with keeping something separate. There's nothing wrong with being a little more private about things, but I think the intent really needs to be studied and really looked into, because if it's because you're trying to be selfish, because you're trying to get ahead, because you feel like you have to be better than, then okay, that's something to work on.
Like, I also just hate that we learn all of these like internalized concepts around the same age. Like, we're 5, this is so much fun, teamwork, yay, but at the same time we're going to do relay races, and you better know that I will destroy you. Like, that is like, it's all taught at the same time. So I feel bad for kindergartners' brains, because they're probably just sitting there going like, I just want a popsicle.
Yeah, and I mean, like, how do you even learn when it's time to do teamwork and when it's time to go against your best friend in a relay race and try to beat them?
Exactly. Like, I don't think that we as adults really understand how traumatic that is for children to be like, okay, this person is your best friend. No, now you're against them in a relay race and you need to win because you really want that chocolate chip cookie. Like, and the loser doesn't get a chocolate chip cookie and you really want that chocolate chip cookie. So you're going to trip someone.
This is imagine a 5-year-old tripping their best friend because they really want to win a cookie.
I'm not proud of myself when I say I have been in these hypothetical kindergartner shoes of wanting a cookie, but also how dare that teacher, PE teacher, instructor, whoever, only promise half the class a chocolate chip cookie.
I'm just knowing you and knowing how competitive you are. I could definitely see it happening. This is making me think about participation trophies, or like medals and the conversation around that, whether if you should get a medal or a trophy for just showing up, or if you need to excel in order to do so.
And I think the way that that this feminism concept works is it's like the inverted version of that. Like, do we not all just have a baseline humanity, or someone gets penalized for having like an extra X, Y, or Z, or having not the quote unquote standard X, Y, and Z? It's like the invert of a participation trophy versus competing. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and I love it because I think that tied it so beautifully into what we're actually talking about. I agree. I think, and that's why I'm like definitely in the space right now where we need human rights defined. No matter what, this is what people deserve as humans. And then you can build from there. If you want a little more, then okay, work a little harder. But with capitalism right now, you have to work for everything. Nothing is a human right. And that does not feel right to me.
Like, I don't think any society throughout human history would get a good score on the human rights scale, honestly. Because if we were really, because we do have a Declaration of Human Rights set forth by the UN in like 1950, whatever, but we all know that the UN is low-key kind of a joke. This is two people that studied international social work. We're fine.
I mean, it's interesting because I did relief work, and a lot of people, I won't say like the organization, but it's an organization that does a lot of good, and the employees, they were like, oh, I could never work for the UN because of the bureaucracy and all the things. It's purely for show, it seems, and the bureaucracy gets in the way of the good that they would be able to do.
The dissonance between theory and practice in so much of not only what we talk about here, but also in concepts of social work and concepts of like actually loving thy neighbor and whatnot. It's just, there's so much cognitive dissonance. And so like once we establish and agree on what is a human right, then we have to actually do it.
Yes, because right now it's just that where you have to work for everything. If you want food, you got to work for it. If you want clothing, you got to work for it. If you like, everything has to be earned. And I think especially in the greatest country in the world, there should be some things where we are able to like shelter. We should be able to know that regardless, we will have a home to go to.
Like nothing is guaranteed. And that's kind of really sucky for someone that didn't even agree to be here in the first place. I'm getting existential on us now, but like,
no, I love it. We didn't ask for any of this.
No. And like, I was talking to my dad. My dad is a staunch capitalist. Okay. We disagree on many many things.
Okay.
I've also been called a communist by my parents. It's great. I really hope they don't listen to this episode. But what was I saying? Oh yeah. So like I was having this conversation with my dad, who is, God bless his heart, a baby boomer. I'm just going to call him out on that. He is a product of his generation, but he's saying just work harder, like, and then you can get all of this stuff. And then I was just like, why should healthcare be a merit of whether or not you're killing it at your job?
Yes. And
Like,
I agree with you.
that's such crazy, like, not only ableist, but it's racist and it's every other ist that I can think of right now, because this system was not built for something outside of the standard.
Yeah, and Mikki talks about that. Look at you. Mikki talks about the danger of trying to apply a system to people it was never built for. So I think your point is fantastic. The old way that was created literally on the back of racism is not going to work today. It was never going to work.
Was it like a couple of weeks ago when I texted you and I was just like, turns out credit scores are racist?
Yes, it was not that long ago.
They came about in the 1980s, and now a number determines on whether or not I'll ever get a house.
Yeah.
I'm never going to get a house.
A greenhouse.
The dream. So it's not even just a feminist issue. It's a human rights issue. Whenever you talk about protecting just basic human autonomy and agency over one's body, whenever we're talking about fast-tailed girls. No, it is not just a fast-tailed girls problem, quote unquote. It is a humanity problem. It is a systemic issue within our society as humans, and people need to like just
they need to understand. Yeah, I've definitely done a lot better job recently of being like, no, let's take the focus off her and let's put it on them, because that's the responsible party. I mean, I just see in so many ways where people don't want to hold men accountable, specifically men, but men accountable for their actions. So it's like, no, we're not doing this. And now I have Mikki Kendall's fantastic words to be like, it's actually dangerous if we could look at the bigger picture. Sure, in this one example. And what I love about what Mikki does is she talks about how it feels safer to talk about preventative things, ways to keep yourself safe, things like that. It makes you feel better, because it's really scary to think about, if you can't do anything to protect yourself, like, what are you going to do? But ultimately, that very limited perspective, very real perspective, but very limited, is really keeping us from the bigger picture of, no, we need to blame people who are at fault, and we need to really watch how we bring up our kids and what lessons we teach them.
Like, whenever I talk about these not preventative measures, but more like systemic measures, like doing like education around consent, education around just like basic human decency, let's be honest. And people are screaming, don't say gay bill, and you want to teach sex ed to kindergartners. No, it all goes into just teaching people how to be a decent human being. And like, I've had this argument of, okay, that's a big picture issue, but we're still having people being assaulted right now. What is your answer to that? First of all, the person I was arguing with was, once again, my dad. And he was just like, what is your answer for the immediate issues? Because there are still violent people assaulting right now. And his vote was more cops. And I was like, no, that's not the answer. You can't just throw gas on a fire. Okay.
Good. No, more cops is not the, I mean, even think about it. If you talk about that, like fast tail girl is a concept we're all very familiar with. And you think about how right now there's a lot of victim blaming. What are cops going to do? They're not going to be there for the survivor.
No. Also, Kendall mentioned in this chapter that we don't even have statistics on what how many assaults are from cops.
I feel like this is like the third or fourth time this specific topic is coming up. It is something that clearly needs to be looked into.
Like, we need more data, and in order to get that kind of data, we need more, like, I don't even know how to get data, honestly, without going full on, like, Google knows everything about me situations. But like, so many of these issues are just so tangled. And you're just like, okay, maybe instead of attacking it from like one angle, we need to figure out A, teamwork, and B, how to take care of, like, go at it with like a multi-prong approach. You know?
Yeah.
Like, there isn't just one way to eat a giant sandwich. I don't know.
I thought you were gonna say bowl of pasta.
Ooh, pasta sounds good too.
I agree, there is not one way to do it. And then, I mean, you think about multidisciplinary teams and what they're able to do because everybody brings their expertise to the table. I think there's something there.
And the teams only work if there is like true leadership within all elements of the team, and the team holds itself accountable. Accountability is such a huge element here.
It is.
We're holding the wrong people accountable. If you're holding quote unquote fast-tailed girls accountable for stuff, like, that's not even their issue. You're going after the wrong accountability. People.
Yeah. When you were talking about your argument with your unnamed family member,
my dad just called out.
It made me think about what we could do right now. We could hold people accountable. That's literally what I thought. When you'd see like these cases going to court, and you see that perpetrators are going like free. I'm not saying locking them up is the answer, but an admittance of this was not okay. Our society does not tolerate this is currently basically non-existent. So I think that's a good starting point.
There is a lot of power in the shame game. Shame has caused generations upon generations of humans to act certain ways. Why can't we just use it for the good? Shame people into not assaulting people. Because that's what's gonna solve
it. I just know that cops are not the answer.
No, that would be the equivalent of literally throwing gas on the fire. Like, I'm not gonna go into it before I get into a rant. Like, and we also know that like the patriarchy and hypermasculinity is deeply seated in the American policing system, and a super inflated budget that could have been going to schools.
It's all fine.
We're doing okay. We're doing okay. Just give us power to make executive orders for like maybe 4 hours, Biden. That's all we need.
We would do so many good things.
That would be great. Yeah.
Well, I think to wrap it up, is there like a thing that you thought about if you had executive order power? What is like the first thing you would do?
Wealth tax.
Mm.
wealth tax and make them all bring all their money back to the US banks. No more hiding it out in the Caymans.
I love that. I have my AOC tax the rich sweatshirt. So
I saw that on you and I was like, I want it.
I paid so much money and waited so long because it sold out like 2 times when I tried to order it. And I do not regret it. It is one of the most comfortable sweatshirts I have. And I have a lot of sweatshirts.
See, my family member, who will now be named as my dad's argument would be, well, if you hate capitalism so much, why are you participating in capitalism? You're someone that just participated in the free market and bought a sweatshirt.
I mean, I have no choice. I don't choose to participate in capitalism. There is no not participating in capitalism.
There is no alternative. I was just like, you're breathing oxygen. What do you mean? Like, do you like want to like stop breathing oxygen? Go switch to nitrogen if you have a choice. Go tell your lungs to do something else.
I would love to go with any alternative that takes care of people, but unfortunately it is not the case right now. So if I'm going to use capitalism, I'll buy a tax the rich sweatshirt.
Exactly. I also need to send you a link to a sweatshirt from a Twitter that I saw the other day that was, I'm not friends with your white Jesus.
That sounds fantastic.
Or I don't follow your white Jesus or something like that. Okay. It was great.
Yes, I need to see more of those.
Oh my goodness. So like, now that we have tackled we didn't tackle it, we basically headbutted it. We headbutted the issue of calling girls fast-tailed girls. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And headbutted the patriarchy. Next week, we are going to take on, what do we got? How to write about Black women and pretty for a ...
Ooh. Oh, both of these are about to be interesting.
I'm going to be throwing this out the window before this is over. Like, I am sitting in front of my window. I will be throwing it out the window and it's going to land on a taco stand before this is all over.
This book is really pushing the limits. So I definitely feel the growth as I read it.
Like, okay, my last question for you before we wrap up is, do you think, like, I'm not saying like it's like comparing apples and oranges between comparing this with Acho and Kendi's books. Mm-hmm. But why do you think this one is so more provoking and eliciting these kind of reactions from us? Do you think it's because it's from a feminist angle?
I think because it's from a hood feminist angle. I think Ibram Kendi, who I love, oh my gosh, he comes from an academic point of view. Emmanuel Acho comes from, oh my gosh, he comes from an anti-racist perspective, and he's like more of a typical person. So it was like a very easy read, something that I digested very easily, but she's specifically talking to us. And I think that certainly, she's been very successful thus far.
Yes, absolutely. Could not agree more. Oh, and then my other question was, what would you do if you had executive power for like 4 hours?
Oh, I think the first thing is forgive student loans. Yeah.
I'd put a cap on housing too.
Okay.
I know someone that works in an architecture firm in the city, and they said the amount that it takes to build a building versus how much they charge per unit in said building once it is built is criminal.
Wow.
We hate capitalism, people.
And that is all capitalism.
Yep. We're fine. So join us next week on We Hate Capitalism and F the Patriarchy.
that like every one of our episodes though?
I know, right? I still need to upload like last month's the last like 3 episodes because we finally got more allowance, more time allowance, which is also capitalism. We're fine. This is fine.
It's all capitalism.
All capitalism. But I will see you next week, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll see you then.
Thank you.